All right, I think we're ready to begin. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Ed Arnold. I'm Vice President of Products here at LeveragePoint. I'd like to welcome all of you to another one of our monthly webinars of thought leadership in value-based strategy. Sponsored by LeveragePoint, we provide the only software solution for value-based pricing. We offer a cloud-based collaboration platform that links all cross-functional team members involved in building and executing a value-based strategy that changes the way that companies create, communicate, and capture value. Find out more about us from our website, leveragepoint.com. Now, during the webinar, if you have any specific questions or comments, please feel free to enter them in the right-hand panel in the questions section. Later, we'll respond to as many of them as we can. And also to reminder to complete our quick survey upon exiting today's webinar. Doing so will enter you into our raffle to win a copy of the book by today's presenter. So let me introduce today's speaker. We are delighted to have with us today noted author and selling expert Andy Paul. Andy is CEO and founder of Zero Time Selling and provides coaching and advice and training to CEOs, entrepreneurs, and sales managers on sales strategies and sales processes. He has 30-plus years of selling experience in a variety of management roles and has done extensive study of customer purchase decision-making and the customer buying process. Andy is an author of two very popular books, Zero Time Selling and his latest book, Amp Up Your Sales, which, as I just mentioned, you might be able to win a free copy of it later, so stay tuned for details on that offer. So at this time, it's time to turn things over to Andy. Andy, thanks so much for being with us today.
Ed, thank you very much for that nice introduction, and I want to thank everybody who's participating in the webinar for spending this time with us as we go through strategies that you can use to deliver value, to build trust, and close more deals. So as you think about value in sales, you really need to think about it in sort of two dimensions. But the first dimension is the one we're all accustomed to thinking about, which is the value that our product delivers to the customer when they achieve the outcomes they're seeking when they're evaluating products and services for purchase. But it's also about the value that you deliver through how you sell that is also very important in helping the customer make the decision to go with you. And we're going to talk about some specific strategies today to talk about building this trust and delivering value to help you close more deals. One is using speed and value to build trust. Two is understand what the buyer's definition of value is. It's very important for you to understand and integrate that into your selling. We're going to talk about how you provide value versus create value for the customer through your selling, and also how to proactively shape your buyer's vision in terms of what it is in their mind they think they're buying. So a question for all of us. So we all operate in competitive marketplaces where there's been an influx in competitors, and you could be competing against 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 competitors on every deal, and sort of at the end of the day, customers get this a little bit of information overload, and when they look out on the field of competitors, basically everybody sort of looks alike. So the question is, how do you differentiate? How do you rise above the competition? Well, one of the things that's a dynamic that's really happening more and more frequently now is customers want to be able to make purchase decisions more quickly. In fact, research by IDC in 2013 showed that customers want to be able to make decisions up to 40% faster. And there's really two objectives you need to keep in mind that the customer is trying to achieve when they're evaluating products and services for purchase. They have their business objective, which I talked about, is that outcome that they want to receive, the return on investment they want to receive from the investment in your product or service. But they also have a buying objective. And that buying objective is they want to be able to quickly gather the information they need to make good decisions with the least consumption of their internal resources. And as a seller, you need to be able to satisfy both objectives, both the business objective and the buying objective, if you want to have a good opportunity to win their business. Now, customers have a very specific preference, and this goes along with wanting to make decisions more quickly, is they want to deal with sellers that can deliver value to them, that can provide knowledge and expertise that help them make a better decision. And so they just don't want people that are informative. They want people that are sellers that are informative. They want sellers that can help educate them. They want to deal with sellers that have some sort of expertise and business acumen. The Gartner Group did a research study back in 2013 they published that showed that by a factor of more than 2 to 1, customers in the IT space, so people on the receiving end of sort of complex sales or some complex buying process, by a factor of more than 2 to 1 preferred to deal with technical experts or business experts, domain experts versus salespeople, because they didn't feel that the salespeople could deliver the value that helped them get their job done. So this isn't something that's just sort of idly nice to have. This to be able, the value, the capability to be able to deliver value through your selling is really an essential part of any strategy you have to win. And this quote from Jeffrey Colvin's best-selling book really says it all. This is from his book, Talent is Overrated. And he said, getting information pushes the 2 constraints everyone faces. It takes time and it costs money. And making sound decisions fast and at a low cost is a competitive advantage everywhere. And the key words there are competitive advantage. The capability to be able to make quick decisions, quick, good decisions, is a tangible value to companies. They see the competitive advantage of being able to evaluate products and services for purchase and be able to deploy those in the field more quickly. If they can make a decision in 3 months that might have taken 6 months before, well, that's 3 extra months of value they get from the investment they make in your product or service. So the key to that, though, to helping them make that decision, falls to the sellers and how you deliver value through your selling process. So if we were to summarize what buying is today, buying can really be summarized as saying customers are active, quickly gathering information they need to make informed purchase decisions at a low cost. And you think about sort of the old cliche about who customers buy is customers don't buy you. It's always been thought that it's the interpersonal relationship that's really key to building trust, but it really is more of a performance-based issue. You'll build trust with a customer as long as you're continuing to meet their needs that they have for information to make progress in their buying process. As long as you continue to meet those needs, you have that trust relationship. If you stop meeting their needs, then you start losing that trust, and that relationship will begin to falter. And so sales, in this environment where customers are looking to make faster decisions, sales is not really about the conventional view that, like I ask audiences when I speak to live audiences about defining sales for me, I always get the answer, it's about persuasion, it's about convincing. But it's really a service-oriented view of sales that prevails now. Sales is about delivering the value that helps customers make fast and favorable purchase decisions at a low cost. Jeff Bezos, CEO and founder of Amazon, was quoted in an interview in the Harvard Business Review saying that, which I thought was a great quote about sales, he said, "We don't make money when we sell things. We make money when we help the customer make purchase decisions." And that's the value-based orientation you need to have in your sales efforts these days in order to win more business. And at the heart of every sales interaction, every sales touch, there's this fundamental exchange that takes place. And it's the customers exchanging their time for some value. The customer is going to give you some time in a sales call. Well, what are they going to get in return? They're going to invest some time in you to read your email. What value do they get in return? And so the model of sales that has to exist in a value-based selling is something that's very mindful, very deliberate, very conscious, that every time you have a sales touch with a customer, there's an exchange of value for the time. In my first book, Zero Time Selling, I write about what I call the return on time invested, ROTI. And that's the standard by which your customers are measuring whether they're getting value from their interactions with you. And if you've ever worked in a sales opportunity, as we all have, that suddenly maybe it's slowed down, the customer started going a little bit radio silent, wondering where they went, well, chances are they've made that decision that we're just not worth any more of their time. And therefore, we're going to get shut out because we're not delivering the value they need to be able to do their job successfully. So what is value in selling? It's a word that's used quite a bit, but it really has a very simple definition from the sales perspective. And value is just information that moves the prospect at least one step forward in their buying process. or another way of reframing that is just information that moves the prospect at least one step closer to making a decision. And that information can come in multiple forms, and that value can come in multiple forms, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But this is a very simple definition. And so it's really important that salespeople sort of get off the autopilot. Because if you're going to sell with value, you're going to change selling from being a very rote, repetitive act to something that's very mindful, very deliberate, and very conscious. And you have to think about delivering the value and what your plan is for delivering value in every sales touch, no matter how big or no matter how small, starting with an email, a voicemail, a video call, a phone call. Every interaction with the prospect has to be thought about deliberately and planned to be able to deliver something of value. Otherwise, why should they invest their time in receiving your call? So when we talk about providing value really has to do with usefulness. So it's value tied to usefulness. So that could be a responsive answer to a question the customer asks. And I'll talk about responsiveness in just a few minutes because it's a very specific definition of responsiveness in sales, which is, if you're trying to do a value-based selling, is really critical to know. Another value is perceptive discovery questions. You're helping the customer think differently about the problem perhaps that they're trying to solve, or demonstrating that you have knowledge about, and you can speak their language and have knowledge about their particular application. Business insights. What insights can you provide to help them understand the decision they're trying to make in a way that they feel that they're making a better decision? Contextual information. Not necessarily case studies, but white papers and third-party research reports and things that help the customer make sense of the information they've gathered from you so far. And case studies, which obviously talk about what your clients have done, your current customers have done, to use the same technology or products or services the customer is going to invest in order to solve a particular problem that they had and the value that they received from investing in it with you. And then if you talk about creating value, and we hear this oftentimes in sales, people talk about you have to create value for the prospect. But there's very, again, specific meaning. As long as you understand that meaning, it helps you shape and plan your sales calls much more effectively. So creating value has to do with value that's quantifiable, it's tangible for the prospect. So example is you compress their buying cycle. We talked about before that competitive advantage of being able to deploy products and services earlier because they have a shorter decision cycle. That has tangible, quantifiable value for the prospect. Similarly, if you compress their buying cycle, you reduce their cost of buying. If they can make a decision in 6 months in 3 months, it might formally have taken 6 months, well, they can redeploy all those resources, the people, time, and effort that would have been allocated to the buying process into more profitable pursuits within their business. If you help the customer undergo sort of a paradigm shift about what they're thinking the best solution for their problem is, and migrate toward a higher value solution, that has tangible value. Maybe they hadn't thought about, there's a different way to approach solving this problem I have. I like this idea you have. If I do that, instead of getting 19% return on my investment on this, I'm going to get 25% return. Hadn't thought about that. That paradigm shift has tangible value for the client. And also using a tool like leverage points, sales value proposition tool, to help quantify the true value of your solution for the customer has real value for them, because then they can begin to start understanding what the possible range of outcomes are from their investment in your product or service and how it might compare to your competitors. So there's some specific strategies you want to think about to deliver value to a customer while you're selling. And one of the easiest, one of my favorites, is what I call accelerate your responsiveness. And the reason I love this is because this is the one thing sellers can do, individual salespeople, that has no tie to the product they're selling or the price of the product or the features they have. This is something they can do on their own that creates value for their customers. Now, responsiveness in sales has a very specific definition. It's not just about being fast. Being responsive is the combination of delivering information, value, as we talked before, with speed. Now, I'll give you an example. I had a previous client that we changed around how they responded to inbound leads. About 50% of their business came from inbound leads that that came from their marketing efforts. And we were able to reduce their response time with the frontline salespeople, people who knew the product, knew the customer's businesses extremely well, from about 2.5 business days to half an hour. So every sales lead that came in being responded to within half an hour. And really on the strength of that alone, over the course of 2 years, the customer dramatically increased their sales, practically doubled their sales over a 3-year period just through their increased responsiveness. Because what it did is it eliminated a lot of their prospects' need to talk to other competitors because they were answering their questions. They were delivering the value they needed to be able to make a decision. So one of the very tactical strategies of this is to sell faster. And I know this may sound intuitively obvious, is to sell faster, but there's a problem behind it because there's certain things you need to do to be able to sell faster. And one of those is you need to have documented and defined sales processes. Now, over the last 2.5 years, I've surveyed the selling processes over 350 companies of all sizes. And what we found through our research was that 72% of companies do not have documented sales processes. So how can you set an expectation of responsiveness, which is of key value that you can deliver to your customer through your sales effort? How can you have an expectation with your salespeople if you haven't defined what your processes are? How should you respond to a lead? How long should it take? Who should respond to a lead? How soon should salespeople reply to customer emails? How soon should they reply to voicemail? Should they clean their inboxes by the end of every night? All these standards that you should set that have ties to the value you can deliver to a prospect through your sales flow through the process. So 72% of companies didn't have a process. Similarly, we found that 72%, and this is not a surprise, the same percentage, 72% of companies don't have responsiveness metrics tied to their customer-facing activities. So this is something that's really simple. It's sort of the acid test I use with new clients, is when I'm sitting with the VP of sales or a CEO, is hand them a blank piece of paper and ask them to do something simple like map out their sales lead response process. From the time it enters your desk to the time it gets in the hands of the salesperson, is going to follow up. How many hands does it go through? How long does it take? And when is that final call to the follow-up call to the customer made? And the fact is that most CEOs, most C-level employees sort of assume that these processes are in place and they're happening when they're really not. And so this is a critical element to being able to be responsive to your customers. And it's not just a nice-to-have thing these days. Even a company as big as IBM, 400,000 employees. In 2013, the CEO of IBM sent out a video message to the entire workforce saying, look, we're being hammered by our competitors and by our customers because we're not being responsive. And henceforth, when you get an inquiry from a prospect or a customer, or a question from a customer or prospect, they will all be responded to within 24 hours. Now, we could make an argument whether 24 hours is fast or not, but it's besides the point. Thing is, they put a stake in the ground and set a standard. And once you set a standard and a metric, then you have the ability to go in and start fine-tuning your processes to make that improve even more and cut that 24 to 12 and so on. So 2 prerequisites to sell faster is have your processes documented and have your metrics in place. The next strategy is you need to sell with experts who can help the customer buy. Now, I talked about this before, as your customers are looking for knowledge and expertise from sellers, but this is very, very important. Now, I get a lot of pushback when I talk about this because I always say that you want to put your people with your deepest product knowledge and your deepest industry expertise closest to the customer, closest to the point of attack. And I get pushback from CEOs and VPs of sales who say, look, technical people, customer support people, whoever, they just don't have the sales gene. They don't have the sales DNA. Now, I've made a career out of turning technical people into world-class salespeople. And as my response to these VPs and these CEOs, these clients, as well, let me tell you, in the 35 years that I've been in sales management, not once have I had a customer or prospect pick up the phone and call me and say, Andy, we love your product. We love John, your salesperson, but the problem is John's just not salesy enough. Could you please send over somebody who's more salesy? Otherwise, we might have to buy from your competition. Now, it's just the opposite, right? They want people that can help them make a decision. And so they want that technical knowledge. They want that domain expertise. Make sure that your knowledge resources that you have align with the knowledge requirements of your prospects. The next strategy is to maximize value. And you want to make sure you have a value plan for every sales touch that can deliver the maximum value. And get back and repeat a little bit what I said before, is it doesn't matter what size sales touch it is, email, phone call, voicemail, whatever, up to an in-person call, so you need to have a value plan. The value plan has two elements to it. It has a goal and an objective. And the goal is, what is the value I'm going to deliver to the prospect in the sales touch? And the objective is, as a result of having received that value from me, what steps are the customer going to commit to take next? And so this requires you as managers who are on this call to work with your team, or if you're an individual seller who's on the call, is for every sales touch, no matter how big or small, have this value plan in place, and requires some time, requires some deliberate effort. Let's give you an example. We're all familiar with sort of the dreaded check-in call. And, hey, Mr. Prospect, this is Andy. We haven't talked in a couple of weeks. I just want to check in and see what's going on. Well, in that case, the customer gave me some of their time, and what'd they get in return? Well, they didn't get anything. And if you repeat that multiple times, the customer is going to suddenly be reluctant to give you their time, because they're going to think, hey, this just isn't worth my time. I'm not getting a return on this. Instead, think about instead of that check-in call, as I like to train reps at companies, is every time you get a new prospect, just set up a Google alert for that customer, that prospect. Put in some keywords about their company, their business, your technology, their industry they're in. Every day, Google will send you an email full of links to articles and white papers and PDFs and case studies that you could use to send to the customer. And so suddenly, instead of doing the check-in call, you send an email. Hey, Mr. Prospect, I was thinking about you this morning as I read this article about how companies in your industry are using technology like ours to increase their market share. I'm going to call you at 2 p.m. There are a couple of points in this article I really want to discuss with you that I think we should discuss. I'm going to call you Monday at 2 to follow up. Well, that has a much bigger impact. And then the customer's got something that you're now beginning to train them, that every time you're communicating with them, you're delivering something of value, something that's worth their time to set aside a few minutes or more in order to engage with the value that you sent to them. Next is, we talked before about shaping the buyer's vision. And every time we buy a product, whether it's for ourselves personally or as an officer in a company or a manager in a company, is we always take a mental tryout of that product. Science has gone through this research, and we all go through the step of making a mental tryout. So if you can help shape that compelling mental image in the customer's mind what their ultimate solution is, then that's key value that you're delivering through your sales. And research has shown, through the Forrester Group, did a study of this particular phenomenon. And what they found is that if you're able to shape the buyer's vision, if you're able to sort of reframe their buying paradigm to create maybe a higher value solution in their mind, that your odds of winning the business from them stand at 65%. So 65% of the time, if you can shape the customer's buying vision through your insights, through the contextual information, through the value you create for them, then your odds of winning the business are huge, 65%. I mean, that is extremely high value opportunities that you're dealing with at that point in time. So it speaks to the importance, as I said, of delivering the value that we spoke about, either providing or creating the value items that we had talked about before. And then the last point I want to talk about is to make every sales touch count. Now, we talked about the importance of having a value plan for every sales touch, no matter how small or how large. But here's another point, is we tend to think about the arc of a sales process as being one that starts sort of small. We have initial contact, we have sort of personal how do you do's, then maybe we'll schedule time for discovery, we have maybe 1 or 2 discovery calls and so on throughout your process, and we build momentum to this closing event. And there's been research done by a behavioral economist named Daniel Kahneman that many of you may be familiar with, may have read some of his popular business books. But earlier in his career, he did research on how people make decisions. And what he found is that when people go through an experience, like a buying process with a vendor or so on, is when people look back to make their decision, there's sort of 2 elements that are the primary factors in their decision making. Basically 2 things that they can recall about that experience. One is the peak event in that experience, and the second is the last event in that experience. And he came up with this what he calls the peak end rule. And I took the peak end rule in my new book, Amp Up Your Sales, and applied it to selling. We talk about peak end selling. So I put out on the screen a generic sales process that, obviously isn't for a complex sale, but just sort of 5 touch points ending up in a decision. And in conventional thinking about selling, you might say, well, geez, my peak event probably is that killer presentation we make to the customer after we've gathered all the information. We're going to propose a big solution for them that's going to blow their mind, and then we'll follow up that proposal, and that will inevitably lead to a decision. But what Kahneman talks about, and what his research found, is that actually any step of your process could be the peak event, and therefore you need to treat each step in your selling process as with equal importance and as a potential peak event. And I'll give an example. I talked about the client before that transformed their business by increasing the responsiveness on sales lead follow-up. Well, what was happening is they were making the peak event, they were making the peak event the initial contact with the customer. We live in a world where 73, according to the latest research report from InsideSales.com, 73% of sales leads are still not followed up. So if you're a seller that says, look, I'm going to commit myself to following up 100% of my sales leads in a very responsive fashion, well, you're going to create a memorable event in the mind of the prospect. That's going to be memorable to them. They're going to get to decision time and say, well, gosh, these guys are so responsive right from the beginning. I mean, it seemed like we barely hit the enter key on entering our request for information, and they had somebody on the line that knew what they were talking about, that was able to answer my questions, and got us through our buying process much more quickly than we thought we were going to. That, when they got to decision time, was the peak event. And so you have to have this mindset that as you do your value plan, as part of the rationale for why you do your value plan for every sales touch, because you just don't know which is going to be the one that's most memorable to your prospect. So just to sum up here, appreciate your time. We're going to deliver value to accelerate decision cycles. You want to be able to sell faster, which means putting in place the processes and the metrics to be able to measure the responsiveness of your customer-facing activities. You want to make sure you're selling with the experts who can help the customer buy. As I said before, the era of the generalist in selling is starting to come to a close. Customers are demanding people with greater levels of expertise. Make sure you have a value plan with a goal and an objective for every sales touch. Shape your buyer's vision and treat each sales touch with equal importance. So that's slides. We're going to go into a leverage point slides in a second. Just briefly about myself. You can contact me at andy@andypaul.com or my website at andypaul.com. I provide training, consulting, workshop services to companies focused on value-based selling, accelerated responsiveness, time-efficient selling. Do a lot of assessments that I talked about of company sales processes, helping companies refine those, and special expertise in helping companies master sales storytelling. Check out my 2 books, Amazon bestseller, Amp Up Your Sales, and my first book, Zero Time Selling. Also just launched Sales Acceleration Training. It's an online, self-paced, interactive video training platform. Great for new salespeople, onboarding new salespeople, as well as existing salespeople, help them understand how to be more value-based sellers.
Thank you, Andy. My name is Dick Orlando. I'm COO and President of Leverage Point. And while Ed is sorting through the questions, I'm just going to steal 4 minutes here and just go over a few things. First of all, thanks again, Andy. That was terrific. Value is in your blood. I can tell. It's also in his book, Amp Up Your Sales. I had an opportunity to read this book, and it's outstanding, and I urge everybody to get it. And one lucky winner today will win a free copy by just completing a quick 3-question survey to let us know how we did after you log off on today's webinar. Value is very, very important. This is the most recognizable person, I think, in the business world. And Warren Buffett says it best, that price is what you pay and value is what you get. But value means different things to different people. And Forrester Research did a terrific study a little while ago with over 300 B2B executives. And according to the Forrester Research, when they asked them, how did the sales reps do in meetings that you scheduled, less than 20% of those meetings, the executives said, actually met their expectations. And when asked why they didn't meet the expectations, over 2/3 of the meetings, they said, were standard corporate presentations talking about their company, their products, and their services, and very little about their world. And just to let you know, it wasn't all negative. The same executives were asked to rate what they liked best about these presentations. And a rousing 62% of them said the sales reps really are very knowledgeable about their company and their products, and we appreciated that. However, very few of the reps, less than 25%, really came into the meeting understanding my issues and where they can help. And this was very core to what Andy just presented so eloquently over the past 25 minutes. Just a little bit about Leverage Point. Leverage Point is a cloud-based application that is aimed at B2B companies who wish to collaborate, reuse, and search data in a repository for, number one, their value modeling and their information from product marketing, product development, and pricing, where they put information in a repository of customer information, industry information, product information, in order to get their new products launched with value ingrained in them, and also for their strategic existing products. And then marketing takes those messages and creates a value proposition. And we have a lot of our customers on the call right now, and our customers primarily have started off in the new product development phase. Several of the customers who are on the call urged us over the past couple of years to really focus more on the capture side, because a lot of these great messages sometimes don't make it to the sales rep's desk, and when they do, they don't make it to the sales rep's lips, and therefore they don't do the things that Andy suggested. So we put together a value proposition tool, which I'll show you in a little bit, that really allows sales reps to take these complex messages. I know a lot of the attendees here have very long sales cycles and selling very highly intensive capital products, capital goods. And it's important that these reps have consistent messages, they build a relationship, but they articulate an economic value to the customer, and obviously at the end of the day, they win more deals. And as a result of this, all of these winning deals then go into this repository where sales reps worldwide, on demand, can access winning proposals and winning value propositions where they can become better prepared for the call. Real quick, value propositions are different, and it's different in the sense that you really need to have your best people, like Andy said, maybe the technical people are good in some calls. The right people delivered to the right messages, to the right audience, at the right time, with the platform of choice, whether it be a tablet or whether it be a desktop, or however they deliver their messages. And just a quick view, and this will take me less than 30 seconds, but this is what we came up with. And some of the customers on the phone drove us to this. And they basically said, we just want one template where the sales rep can have a 1-hour sales meeting and get to the value very, very quick. This is a dynamic value proposition in comparison to a static PowerPoint that that can be simplified, customized for the customer. By the way, it can be with your logo and your company's colors, where you start the conversation off very early with talking to the customer about the value that they're bringing to the table, that your rep is bringing to the table. And then with one click, you show terrific graphics on there. And there's also an ability to drill down as appropriate. For example, with some of the assumptions that were made, you can change those assumptions, the simple ones. And also you can get into, your rep can get into very simply by just clicking on the value that they're claiming to give and show how they calculated that value. And this creates a nice conversation, because if the customer is questioning one of the assumptions, you can change the assumptions and everything else changes. And again, this is all on one screen. Last but not least is every sales rep, every company has their favorite collateral material, whether it be customer case studies, videos, or what have you, and that's all in here as well. Again, fully customized for the customer. And what this allows you to do is it builds trust, validates value, like Andy mentioned, and also it gets you to that next step. And speaking of next steps, on Friday, for those of you who want to see what our customers did a great job telling us how to do it, and were very, very helpful during the process, we have a 30-minute live product demonstration on this coming Friday from 11 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So join us for a live demo for our new value proposition tool. Very happy to answer your questions as well. And you can do that simply today by not only having an opportunity to win Andy's book, but also to register for this webinar with one click. Thank you very much, and let's move on to the questions.
All right, so there's still time to get your questions on the list by just simply typing them into the questions panel. A couple that have come in during Andy's presentation. The first one is, we experience long sales cycles for our products in 16 to 18 months. At what stage of the sales cycle is it best to introduce your value proposition? I guess this goes to Andy.
Sure. Well, gosh, I think it's hard to get a meeting if you don't talk about your value proposition, right? I mean, customers are looking for some way. If you consider you're trying to reach out to somebody, a decision maker or a point of contact within a company that's got a full inbox, and they're saying, look at their inbox or like their Twitter stream. It's just like, I'm only going to click on a few. What's going to attract their attention? I mean, it gets down to maybe even something in your initial subject line or voicemail that you leave somebody. You have to express that value proposition in order to make yourself interesting enough for them to invest their time. So as early as possible, I believe.
Okay. Next question is about research, and it says, how much research should sales reps do before presenting to customers? Do you suggest using exact data before presenting the initial prop?
No, I mean, that's sort of the refuge of salespeople that don't want to make calls, is I got to get the data perfect, right? I got to make sure I have everything lined up. Where you really want people that are, you want to do your research, absolutely, but it's going to make a difference whether you're spending 15 minutes versus 5 minutes to do that initial research to make that first call. I'm not sure that it does. And so I think you really want people that are more inclined to do some research, make the call, start the conversation with the customer.
All right. Looks like we have one more, and again, there's still time to put your question in if you'd like. And it goes, based on your experience training new account sales reps, what are your top recommendations when calling on new customers?
What are my top recommendations? Well, I think there's sort of three questions that are good questions to pose to somebody, a potential prospect, when you get them either on the phone or online or in person for the first time. And one is, what's changed in your business, what's changed in your world that's motivated you to reach out to me or to take this call. So that's sort of a trigger point type question. What's the trigger that's changed in their life? And that speaks to what their motivations are. The second question I love to ask is, why are you talking? Why'd you reach out to me in particular, right? Our company in particular. What is it about what we do that caught your eye? And that's going to, perhaps they said, hey, we looked at your website and saw that you help this company expand in Latin America, and we're thinking about opening a branch in Brazil or something. It's going to speak to what their priorities are. So it's what's changed, what's the trigger event, what's changed in your world, your business world, new CEO, new product launch, so on, that motivated you to reach out to us. Second question is, what motivated you to reach out to us in particular? And the third question is, what one question do you absolutely need to have answered by the end of this call?
All right, good advice. Okay, so a couple more have just come in. One is about how do you facilitate marketing people to really support salespeople? I guess it's talking about the role of marketing in sales.
Yeah, well, good question, right? It's I think part of it depends on what role marketing really has in your company and what sort of your product, right? I've worked in companies where marketing is very technical, almost like a sales engineering type function, product management, and so on, that they really became useful in taking them out into the field and meeting with customers and being these value delivery engines. In other cases, it's coordinating with them to make sure that you're targeting the right customer profile so they can target their marketing to be able to generate the right type of leads that are worth following up on. So it's really sort of a mix depending on what the marketing function is. Again, as you get more technical, then hey, they can actually be useful directly talking to the customers.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. This is Dick. Also, we noticed that a lot of pre-sale technical support folks, and Andy brought this up very well in his presentation, put the right resource in front of the customer. A lot of times a sales rep will get into the weeds a little bit on proving value, especially when there's formulas involved and there's costs involved. So it's always good to bring your technical support person into the call. And the nice thing about a value proposition, if done well, it not only brings out the 30,000-foot value to the customer, brings it into specific numbers, but behind it, that technical, sometimes people call them the technical rock stars, are talking to technical people on the other side, and they can prove the value in very, very specific terms and solicit some conversation. So that's something that we see very often from our customers, that they'll go in with a sales rep and a technical rock star, and they're able to use the same platform to explain it.
All right, so here's a question that is getting at procurement, I guess multiple vendor situations. Let me just zoom in on that there. Most procurement organizations are required to engage multiple sellers. How do you break from price competition and leverage value in those situations?
Dick, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, and Andy did a great job at basically saying establish value, establish value, establish value. And you establish value with the person who has the risk of making the decision or has the benefit of making that decision. That's generally the operations people. And I always urge people, please don't get into a procurement pricing discussion until you have your operations decision maker on board that this is the solution they want. Otherwise, that purchasing individual will unwind that value very, very much and try and turn you into a commodity. So get the support of your key operational decision maker in the account before you go into procurement.
Right, and I think there's something else to think about from a tactical sales perspective, which is, yeah, let's say the buyer does sort of commoditize the offerings that the various vendors are making. There's been some increasing amount of research recently about what they call tie-breaking selling. You get more in a commodity type world. How do the buyers really differentiate between the various offerings and the value they're going to receive? And what the research is showing is that things like being responsive, things like creating these peak events during your sales, they become tiebreakers. And that increasingly in tie-breaking selling, it's not price ultimately that wins the deal. It's what is the added value. I call sort of that extra 1% of value that you can deliver to the prospect that will make a difference during your sales process. And so these elements we talked about in terms of your value plans and your responsiveness and so on, selling with the experts really make a difference at the end of the day when you get into that type of situation.
Okay, so here's a question about best practices. Whoops, another question just came on. Best practices on how to get salespeople to ask the right types of questions for the customer. So, and there's some more narrative in here that talks about the ability to really engage in thoughtful conversations with customers. How do you? I guess the question is, how do you teach that, or what sort of best practices would you recommend to guide salespeople in asking good questions with customers?
Sure. Well, there's multiple parts. So one is make sure you hire the right people to begin with, people that have the right and relevant backgrounds. But absent that, if you're saying, look, with the group of people I have on board now, how do I do that? the first thing you do is you need to have people that go out and model that type of behavior for them. So who are people that they can go on calls with to know the right questions to ask, so they can go on multiple joint calls with people and see how it's done, so they can then begin to start putting the pieces together. And so I think that modeling that behavior, so whether it's going out with a manager, it's going out with a senior technical support person, somebody that has that expertise, that really becomes the best way to train people, is to start there. And then you have to continue to do this internal training on the use of your product. I mean, it's easy enough for people to remember, features and so on of a product, but really how it's put to use. So more case studies, testimonials from customers that you can train your people in, bring customers into your sales meetings to talk about how they're using your product and your service, really become valuable ways to train people. So I started getting this more, I'll say global, but broader view of, and more precise view of how customers are actually using the products to extract value from them.
Mm-hmm. And there's a follow-up question, and I think this one is more for you, Dick, and it's asking about how the Leverage Point tool supports those types of conversations with customers.
Well, what we always do is tell the sales rep, put yourself on the other side of the table when you're giving a presentation. What questions should you be asking? And if you're honest about it, what you're there for is the customer is wanting to know, what problems can you solve for me? And why should I do business with you? And why should I do business with you now? So I think you want to just be yourself. And the world has changed, like Andy said, and just ask honest questions or make honest statements, such as, I came into this presentation, Mr. Customer, with some assumptions based on other experiences I've had with customers similar to you in your industry. And I'd like to show you how I can save you $2.2 million over the course of the year. So these are the assumptions that I made. Did these make sense? And you engage the customer with honest, straightforward questions. And the Leverage Point platform, the biggest feedback we get from our customers is the sales rep can spend 100% of their time in that sales call just dealing with this one platform, and they don't have to keep flipping slides back and forth after they do their obligatory "this is who we are" slides, and start saying, well, this is coming later, or I just went over this, let me go back. It's all on there. So it's the biggest compliment we get from salespeople is I can focus on looking at the audience and just clicking on areas that I know what's behind those links. So hopefully that answers your question.
All right. Well, thanks, Dick, and thanks, Andy. I think that's all the time we have for questions today. There's one last question that I'll be happy to answer, which is yes, we will make copies of this presentation available, both as a download as well as a recorded video. And before we sign off, I do want to give a quick program announcement for our next webinar, which will be on February 25th. We're going to be really excited to have Joanne Smith. She's a former executive at DuPont who will be talking about building a value-driven culture. We had Joanne speak in 2014 and was a very popular speaker. She has a great book called The Pricing and Profit Playbook. So I'm sure many of you will want to tune in for that. That's Wednesday, February 25th. There will be emails going out for registration information on that. So again, just one last reminder, please fill out the survey when you exit today's webinar and you'll be in for the drawing for Andy's book. So at this point, I would like to thank our guest presenter today. Andy, great presentation. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And for everyone else, thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.